The Kidnapping of Stephen Stayner. He escaped after 7 years and saved another child. Some survival stories are about endurance. Others are about escape. This one is about choice. After 7 years of captivity, one boy finally reached freedom. But instead of running alone, he made a decision that would save another child's life. This is the story of Stephen Stayner, a boy whose courage emerged not at the moment of escape, but in the moment he refused to leave someone else behind. Stephen Stayner was born in 1965 and grew up in Merced, California. It was a modest town, quiet and familiar, where children rode bikes freely and neighbors watched out for one another. Stephen was shy, gentle, and eager to please. He loved school, family, and the sense of belonging that comes with routine. In December of 1972, Stephen was just 7 years old. On a winter afternoon, he walked home from school alone, something that felt ordinary and safe at the time. That walk would change his life forever. As Stephen walked, a man approached him claiming to be a police officer. The man told Stephen he was in trouble and needed to come with him. Stephen was frightened, but also conditioned to obey authority. The man's name was Kenneth Parnell. Parnell took Stephen away from everything he knew and brought him to another town. From that moment on, Stephen's life was no longer his own. Parnell did not physically restrain Stephen in the way people often imagine captivity. Instead, he built a psychological prison. He told Stephen that his parents had given him away, that they did not want him anymore, that returning home would result in punishment for both of them. For a 7-year-old, this lie was devastating and believable. Stephen did not try to escape because he believed he had nowhere to return to. Stephen lived under constant supervision. He was forced to adopt a new identity and call Parnell his guardian. Over time, Stephen learned survival strategies: compliance, silence, emotional withdrawal. He attended school under a false name. Teachers noticed he was quiet, reserved, and unusually compliant. No one suspected the truth. The world moved on. Stephen remained trapped. Years passed. Stephen grew from a child into a teenager while living under Parnell's control. He worked, attended school sporadically, and learned to exist within his captor's rules. Despite the trauma, Stephen retained a sense of empathy and morality. That inner compass would later save a life. In 1980, Parnell abducted another boy, Timothy White, who was just 5 years old. Stephen immediately recognized what was happening. He saw himself in Timothy. He knew the lies that would follow, the fear, the confusion, and he made a decision. Stephen understood that escaping alone would mean freedom, but leaving Timothy behind would mean condemning him to the same fate. He weighed the risks. He could be caught. He could be punished. He could fail. But doing nothing was worse. Stephen decided to act. In March of 1980, Stephen took Timothy and left. They walked for miles. They asked strangers for help. They relied on Stephen's memory of the world beyond captivity. Eventually, Stephen contacted the police. He told the truth. Everything. When Stephen's identity was confirmed, his family was stunned. For 7 years, they had searched, mourned, and hoped. Now Stephen is home. But the reunion was complicated. Stephen was not the same child who had disappeared. He carried trauma that few could understand. Stephen was hailed as a hero. Media outlets praised his bravery. Television movies were made. The public focused on the rescue. But Stephen struggled. He had survived, but survival did not erase the past. He grappled with identity confusion, guilt, shame, emotional isolation. At the time, trauma support systems were limited. Stephen was expected to move on. Kenneth Parnell was arrested and convicted. However, the sentence shocked many. He received just 7 years in prison. Once again, the system failed to match the severity of the crime. Stephen tried to build a normal life. He worked. He married. He became a father. But trauma does not disappear when captivity ends. It follows quietly. Stephen carried it alone. In 1989, Stephen Stayner died in a motorcycle accident at just 24 years old. The news devastated those who had followed his story. The boy who had survived the unimaginable was gone far too soon. Stephen's story reshaped public understanding of child abduction, psychological captivity, trauma survival. His courage saved Timothy White, who grew up, had a family, and lived because of Stephen's choice. That is Stephen's legacy. Stephen Stayner was not a superhero. He was a child who chose empathy over fear. He did not escape because he was fearless. He escaped because he cared. Stephen's story reminds us. Trauma can be invisible. Survival is not simple. Heroism often comes quietly. It challenges us to support survivors beyond rescue. Stephen Stayner escaped captivity after 7 years. But his greatest act was not escape. It was choosing to save someone else, at immense personal risk. His courage lives on. This was the kidnapping of Stephen Stayner. A tragic story. A heroic story. A reminder that even in captivity, humanity can survive. If you want more responsible, in-depth true crime stories centered on courage, survival, and understanding, subscribe to Mystery Grid. Because every story is a puzzle, and some are solved by the courage to protect others.